Hi guys, and welcome to tonight's live Music Tech webinar. Now, following on from the Music Tech Basics series that we started last term, where we looked at all the kind of effects and different processes, this term we're going to be looking specifically at synthesis. We're going to take it from a very basic approach, starting from modules and just building it up until we've finally got a bit of everything going on together so we can kind of understand how these things work. This is no small feat, as every single synthesizer is configured differently, and that's the beauty of synthesis, is that it's so powerful and it can literally go anywhere really, and it can do pretty much anything. So we're going to build up from one module at a time and go from there. So the first thing we're going to look at in tonight's one is oscillators and the associated amplifiers. So same drill as every week. If you want to tweet us or ask a question during the Q&A session, please do. Twitter seems to be the best port of call at the minute, but you're more than welcome to use the Q&A here on Google Hangouts. If you want to get hold of us, just at Music Tech 101 and send us a tweet, something related to synthesis. And I'll see you in the Q&A section, so roll in those questions. So the content for tonight's show, we're going to look at what is an oscillator firstly, different kinds of oscillators, and then this massive subject of subtractive synthesis and how oscillators are combined to create a richer sound. Then we're going to do a little demonstration just to show you kind of how these things work. And we're going to show off each of the individual oscillators to see how their sound texture works, okay? And then obviously we'll do the Q&A. So firstly, what is an oscillator? Now, as it says here, you can use oscillators for lots of things, not just music. Actually, oscillators are mainly used for electronic equipment and things like that. But during the 1970s, and actually before that, musicians found a real big use for oscillators and synthesis in general. And they started developing these components to create tones and sounds through these wonderful things. And there's a few really good resources out there to kind of demonstrate some of this. As said here on Wikipedia, there's loads of different things for them, but the main oscillators are kind of generated from sine waves and square waves. Now, here on the right-hand side, I have this sine wave rolling out. Now, in the early days, it was measured by samples per second. Now, you can think of a sample per second as being a kind of big circle where the full cycle doesn't finish until it goes round on itself. Now, the closer the cycles per second, the higher the tone or the higher the pitch. Okay, the further apart or the slower the cycle per second, the lower the tone, the lower the pitch. Okay, so that's the general philosophy. And what you've also got, so this is from left to right is kind of how it generates its pitch. From top to bottom is how it generates its overall sound pressure, if you like, or the amplification, the loudness. And then there's obviously the shape that comes with that as well. Now, as said previously, oscillators, really you can control them using three different things: the volume, the tone, and the shape. Now, the shape is probably the most interesting thing. This is where we get all the different kinds of oscillators from. So sine wave is obviously the most common. Square is the next one, but you've also got sawtooth. You've also got noise parameters, and some really interesting configurations from this, okay? So just looking at this demonstration here, you can see how sine waves are used to kind of multiply themselves, and this will give you a different kind of sound texture, okay? Okay, so here's a few of the different shapes that happen, and these are quite nice animations. These are all from Wikipedia, but it kind of shows how the initial shape is a sine wave and how it's manipulated to kind of create these different kinds of shapes and get them kind of shaping and sounding differently. During the demonstration part of this show, we will actually kind of demo a few of these different shapes and just give you an idea of how the tonal textures are different, okay? So as said previously, there are a few main ones, but there are a lot more. So you've got this sine wave, which is probably your cleanest signal, followed by the square wave. Then you've got a triangle. Then you've got a sawtooth or just a saw wave, followed by noise. And then you've got this more complex shape of a sample kind of wave where the actual signal of the consistent wave is generated from a sampled piece of audio or whatever. Okay, So the first rule of subtractive synthesis, choose your oscillators wisely. When you are thinking about sound creation, it all starts with the oscillators. So making sure that you choose the correct oscillators for the sound that you're trying to achieve is really important. Now there's no kind of easy way of doing this. It's all about trial and error and experimenting. And the more you kind of play around with these things, the more you get used to kind of how these oscillators work and how these different modules kind of fit together. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of different synthesizers, but the first thing you just need to know is most synthesizers have this modular kind of feel. So each module kind of makes up a synthesizer. Um, for the oscillator section, you really have two main areas. You have the oscillators and then you have the mixer. Now, the mixer is what shapes the actual sound itself. So making sure that the balance between the oscillators just kind of works and has the effect that you want, okay? And just gives you a deeper sense of control, really. So this is one of my favorite synthesizers, and it's a synthesizer that I use with most of my students to kind of demo a lot of this stuff. It's called the TAL-Electro. It's a free plugin and it works for both PC and Mac. So you can patch it into Logic or you can patch it into Cubase. It's fantastic. But in my opinion, there is no simpler synthesizer to learn from. Okay, so that's why we're going to start with this. So let's have a little look at this. Now, if you look at this mixer section, it says here that we've got 4 oscillators, okay? So we've got this oscillator 1, we've got this oscillator 2, so OS1, OS2, OS3 is kind of short for oscillator, obviously, but I just want to point that out. Oscillator 3, which is this sub oscillator, which gives it these soar kind of low down tones. And then you've got this noise oscillator. You don't have any more parameters apart from just turning it up, okay? So that's how the noise works. And then you can mix these oscillators together to get them working. Now over here, you have a few generic kind of controls. And the more powerful oscillators, you're going to get real control over the pitch or the cycles per second. Now in this one, I just love this. And there's not too many that give you this kind of control in such a simple interface, okay? So what you have here is semi, basically stands for semitone. So as you twiddle this up or down, you're moving the dial in exact semitones, okay? So starting, I believe it's from the middle, but it could be from the left. So you start at 0 semitones and work all the way up, probably to 24, which is 2 octaves. And then you have this fine, which is your sense. Sense of a semitone. Basically, this middle will be the 0 point, and then you'll go 50 cents below and 50 cents above. And basically, what happens with semitones is there are 100 cents, or in fine tuning, there are 100 that make up that semitone, okay? So, and this can give you some really lush, thick tones, okay? If you imagine you detune each of these oscillators so that say one is a semitone lower than you want it, one is a semitone higher than you want it, and then you fine tune it, the actual sound quality is going to be kind of rough edged, okay? No matter which oscillator wave you use, it's going to be quite a rough edge. It's going to give you this massive kind of texture just from playing even one note, okay? You have a few other dials here, and these are not generic across synthesizers. You have this phase shifting one, which just basically takes the oscillator out of phase, and then you have this pulse wave, which is just a different kind of oscillator, almost like an LFO, and you can just control the rate of the pulse if you like. Okay. You also have on this oscillator, you have this frequency modulation amount as well, which is quite nice and it works in similar ways. Frequency modulation is a different kind of modulation to subtractive, and we'll try and cover all of them as we go through this, okay, just to kind of give you some idea of how the different synthesis techniques work and stuff. So I think that's pretty much all I need to say here. So you set up your modulator, you set up the different wave that you want on each, sorry, the oscillator, you set up the different waves you want on each, and then you mix them all together, depending on the sound settings you want. So let's have a look at another synthesizer. Now this one here, I haven't used Cubase now for about a year or so, but this when I was an avid Cubase user, this was my all-time favorite synth, Prologue synth. It comes with the full version of Cubase, and it is ridiculously powerful. It comes with thousands of presets, and it comes with thousands of different options, and just there are no restrictions to what it can do. This is how this one works in terms of oscillation. Okay, so here's oscillator one. So here is your mixer. Okay, so this is how much mix you got for oscillator one. This is oscillator two, and this is your mixing dial again. So it's saying, okay, how much of oscillator two do you want to hear? And this is oscillator three, and how much you want of oscillator three you want to hear. Okay, you also have this noise oscillator again. And you have a little bit different here. This is ring modulation, which is a fantastic little effect that you can put on. But what we're really concentrating here is the mix controls. So making sure we understand our amplifier, and then we have our actual oscillator over here. So here it's patched into sawtooth. Um, we have a fine setting here, which is our scent, and I believe the course, it just threw me a little bit, but I believe the course is still the same as our semitones actually. I might have to check that again, but I think this is semitones, and I think this is obviously our sense, okay? And this is what you'll find across all synthesizers, is that the terminology that they use tends to be slightly different. It can be slightly annoying, but there does seem to be kind of differences in the way that the technology is labeled. Okay, so if you clicked on this button here, you'd have a massive drop down of all the different oscillators that you could use, and there are loads compared to TAL-Electro. There are absolutely loads. Okay, and you can adjust all these dials as much as you want, but in its fundamental form, it works almost the same. You've got four oscillators, so 1, 2, 3, plus a noise oscillator, plus a ring modulator, so four oscillators there. This is how you control the volume, and it's job done from that. I don't think that's too difficult. You've got a few extra things, but there we go for that one. Now, the next one we want to look at is the ES2, which is a Logic one. Now, like I said, I've only been using Logic just over a year now, maybe 2 years. And this one is a fantastic synthesizer. I really like it, and it's got a different approach to amplifier and oscillators again. So this time you mix the oscillators using this little triangle here. So as you can see, if you're over in this corner here, you're only going to be patched into oscillator 1. If you pull it all the way to this corner, you're only going to be patched into oscillator 2. If you pull it all the way to this corner, you're only going to be patched into oscillator 3. Okay, so fairly simple. That's, and if you want a broad mix of all three, you'd pull it right dead center there, and you'd get exact amount. So it's quite a nice way of mixing all three together rather than having individual dials. Okay. So once again, you can turn oscillators on and off. So as you can see here, only oscillator one is on, the other two are off. You've also got your sense control. Now, it's a little bit more difficult to control your sense here. You actually have to pull this dial down, click and pull it down, and that will control the sense. But your semitone, you get the use of this little wheel. Once again, I think that looks like it's 36 semitones either way, which is quite nice, quite a massive range, which is good. And the same controls for each of them. You've got a nice little pitch bend wheel here, but that's not what we're going to focus in on today, just the oscillators. Now, how do you control different kind of oscillators? Each one of these has got these kind of shapes, and it gives you here. So you've got your regular sine wave, and if you drag it this way, you have a bit of frequency modulation. Then you've got your square waves, two of which. Then you've got this sawtooth followed by a triangle. So exactly the same parameters, but they are laid out quite differently actually. Okay, so let's have a little play around with a few of Logic Pro's oscillators. We're going to start with the simple ones. We're going to look at the different tones that each of these oscillators create, just so you can kind of see the difference between them. Then we're going to configure it to kind of see how they work together and how you can shape the amplitude with the kind of tonal textures. And we'll do some really nice stuff there to give you an idea of what you can do. Ultimately, though, once you've done this, best thing is to go onto your DAW and just have a go and have a little play with these oscillators and just kind of get an understanding for how they work. Okay, so just bear with me for 2 seconds while I just flip this screen over to my Logic window. It might just take me a couple of seconds, as it always does. Okay, so here we are. Now, this first one we're going to be using is the ESM, which is a monophonic synthesizer, okay? Monophonic synthesizers are quite nice. They tend to have a bit of portamento applied to them. Now, portamento in this case is called glide. And it's basically where if you click on one note, let's just see if I can demo this. So here's the A note. Okay, and then if I click on another note, you'll hear that it slides to that note. Now this is quite a short glide. So if I turn the glide up and I go, hear it ripple through those, and that's called portamento, and this is a really good effect. Okay, and because it's a monophonic synthesizer, basically meaning only one note can be played at a time, it really kind of, that's one of its kind of finer points, that it gives you this portamento effect to massive effect, in fact. Okay, so this works slightly different here. Okay, what you've got is you've got your semitones here where they're patched into 8, 16, and 32. Now, as you click through, you'll notice that the higher tones are the lower numbers, okay? And then the low tones is this 32. So that's, this time you have no sense or semitone controllers. You just have this way of controlling kind of how this works. The next thing you're going to notice about this is you only have two oscillators. You have this sawtooth oscillator and this square oscillator, and then you pull this over to get the right mix. At the moment, all we have is this square wave, okay? So that is your, let me just turn this glide off a minute. And we'll make it, there we go. Okay, so there's your square wave. Now let's listen to this sawtooth. Okay, now let's mix them together. We can change this. I deliberately turned the resonance down, but here we go. And you can get that. Now, this isn't as clean as the TAL-Electro because you don't have as much control over the sound. You kind of, everything is applied. There's no turning things off necessarily because you always got an oscillator on. You've always got something on. You can't turn it off, but it's still a good synth nonetheless. And if you want to create some really nice, maybe bass tones or something like that, you're going to be able to get that very, very easily from this particular synth. It's a really good synth. Okay, the next one we want to look at is the ESP. Now, the ESP is a polyphonic synthesizer, and it works much the same way. Let me see if I can make this a bit bigger. I don't know if this will go blurry for you guys. Okay, so it works in much the same way as the monophonic synthesizer, but this time you can actually control the oscillators that you use. You've still got this dial for your tonal qualities, but you do have more control over it. So if I press A now, hopefully if I've set this up right, you won't hear a sound, okay? Because none of my amps are on, and amps are controlled via the oscillators. So basically, nothing will happen until you turn an oscillator on. Okay, so there we go, a nice triangle wave, and that's a really clean form there. So that's as pure a triangle wave that you're going to get, really. Okay, now we can listen to a sawtooth. Now square wave. Square wave -1. Square wave -2. This is getting low. And then we've got this noise oscillator. Okay. So just turn this one on. There we go, we've got a nice one there. Now, what we can do here is we can use the amplifier to actually kind of just mix the oscillators together. So you can hear that ringing out a little bit as that one went up. Let's bring that one down a bit. And let's just set this up a little bit like this. Put a bit of noise in. Okay, so that's quite nice. So you can see how that kind of works now. And we will go into these other dials, but we're just concentrating on how oscillators work at the moment, okay? So we're just going to leave that one there. That's the ESP and how the oscillators work for this particular one. Now, the next one is my ES1. I really like this synth as well. Let me see if I can make this one a bit bigger. So, the ES1. How do the oscillators work here? This time we only have two oscillators and we have this mix dial. So when it's at the top, you're just mixing this one. And when it's at the bottom, just mixing this one. Now it's off at the moment, so you shouldn't hear anything. Okay? And when I turn it on, well, we have to click on these ones. Have a bit of noise on this one. Now let's mix in. Let's just turn this up to the next one. Now let's mix in some of the cleaner ones. So here's our cleaner synths. And we've got a bit of frequency modulation there as well. There we go. Now let's turn on the noise and mix these two together. Same pitch parameters again, so you haven't got that finer control that you had on the TAL, but you still got so makes it nice. And you can also control the amplifier from over here as well. This is quite nice. It controls the lowest possible volume with the highest possible volume, which is good. Okay. So that's how it works here. We've only got two oscillators on this one, but it's still a powerful synth. Loads more you can do with it. Now let's look at my final one. So the mothership of Logic, which is the ES2, and this is really, really powerful. Has three oscillators plus loads and loads of control that you can kind of use. Now, I've turned all these oscillators off. You can't hear anything. So let's just turn one on at a time. Just push that to the top. Okay. Now you can hear the difference between those first few and this one. Those oscillators are just really nice. They're rich, aren't they? Let's just get a sine wave so you can hear that. Okay. So you can hear the difference between all the oscillators. Now, this is where it becomes really cool. So this is set to 0 tones. Okay, so we can push this up an octave. Let's do that. So there we go. We've got an octave, and we can detune it as well. Now, you probably won't be able to hear that on its own, but once we add another oscillator, now this one, we'll just put 0. And we need to push it in as well. So if we want half of each, we go there. And now you can hear. And if we want more of this one, or only this one, we go there. You can hear how rich that is. Let's put this. Put that on 0. Not too keen on that. Actually, let's put this one on -12, so we have that octave spread. Okay, that sounds cool. So now let's turn number 3 on. Let's have a little listen to number 3. And we'll put this in on its own. Now let's put this one on noise. Okay. Never mind. Now let's bring that dead center, so we mix all three together. Just going to put it back a bit. So that's quite a nice way of controlling it, and I think hopefully now you get a sense of how the oscillators work and what they do. And even though each one of these synths I've showed you has oscillators, you can see that they're completely different in the way that they're laid out. So that was a kind of a rough shot tour of how these work. Now let's flick back to the presentation again, just finish off. Give me 2 seconds. Here we go. So I hope that was useful. Hopefully you got lots of good stuff out of that. The idea with this series is just to kind of introduce you to each of the modules first, and then we're going to go through and we're going to put them all together. So you're going to get a really good idea by the end of this course or this end of series of webinars of how to kind of use a module, how to use a synthesizer and get the most out of it. Okay, so tonight, just oscillators, and we've done really well with that, and hopefully you've seen how they work, and it's really powerful stuff. Now if you have a question, you can tweet me at music tech 101, or you can use the Q&A button on this particular webinar, or you can use the discussion button on this webinar, or you can use the Google Plus events page to ask your questions. Now let's just go through and see if anyone's around tonight. It looks like we've got 3 people watching live, which is fantastic. Thanks for joining us, guys. And let's just refresh some of these pages and see if we've got any questions. Okay, let's just check the Q&A. Most of the discussion's happening on Twitter, so I'm going to leave that till last just to see if we got any good stuff happening over there. So Q&A. And I'll hang out for a few more minutes just to see if you guys have got any questions you want to ask. So let's just check this. Okay. Always takes me so long to log in. Right then. Oh, it looks like we've got 9 notifications. So hopefully we've got a few questions. Oh, there they go now. So hopefully you enjoyed tonight's webinar. Like I said, next week we're going to be looking at envelopes and how to shape an envelope to kind of use subtractive synthesis with a bit more kind of diversity in the sounds that we're trying to create. Okay, so notifications. Yeah, mission to self for next week. I'm going to set this up in advance, I think. Okay, what we got? Something there. Okay, loads of new followers tonight. That's fantastic. Yeah, Dave's back. Missed you over the last couple of weeks, Dave. Nice to see you again. What is a good program to create a synthesizer patch from scratch, e.g. starting with oscillators and building up the sound? Well, I think probably the most fun I've ever had creating patches from scratch would have to be Reason. I really don't think for dance music production and creating these kind of unique sounds, I don't think you can beat Reason. Some of the modules and stuff that you can get from that is amazing actually. So I would start from Reason, but any of the stuff that I showed you tonight, the ES2 you can create from scratch, and I think you're a Cubase user, so I think Prologue you can create patches from scratch in there. You hit, I think it's the save, there is a save button if you go into the preferences dialog. Not the preferences, what do they call it on Cubase? I think it might just be the patches icon at the top, and you can actually save out your own sound. So, Prologue's a fantastic synth, especially if you're on Cubase. What else we got? I think that's it for tonight. Let me just give you a couple of seconds because I keep leaving the show and then a couple more people turn up. So just before we hang up, next week we're looking at envelopes, looking at how to shape envelopes. If you've got any feedback or you want to kind of say, hey, you missed this stuff, or you need to cover this, please let me know, and I'll always try and fit it in if you have any questions. So you can contact me at musictechstudent.co.uk, or you can join our newsletter at mymail.musictechstudent.co.uk, or Twitter, Facebook, or Google. Let me just refresh this page. I think we've done. I think that's everyone. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. I hope you found that useful. Happy studying, and I'll see you at 8 o'clock next week for more synthesis basics, and we're looking at envelopes. Have a good week, guys, and I'll see you next week.